Welcome back to the Veteran Benefit Podcast. I'm your host, Rebecca Deming. Today we're going to be talking about what evidence you need to file a successful VA claim for disabilities. So, first of all, as I've mentioned in some of the prior podcast episodes, I think sometimes people get a little bit too wrapped up or hesitant to file anything because they think they need to gather everything before they can even file their claim. And I just want to remind everybody that VA has a duty to assist. So once you file your claim, VA has a job and they're supposed to help you develop your claim, which means they're going to send you to compensation and pension exams, C&P exams. They are going to help you gather medical evidence. They're going to let you know what evidence they think you need. So don't wait too long to file your claim because you're spending all this time trying to gather everything. That said, I want to dive into what evidence VA does consider and what's going to be the most persuasive and what kind of evidence is going to help you win your claims as quickly as possible. So, we need to keep in mind that in order to win a claim, VA has to have 3 elements of service connection. So, you're getting disability benefits because you have a disability that is connected to service. That means you have a current diagnosed condition, something that happened in service, and a connection or a nexus between those two. So it sort of depends on kind of what the condition is and what happened in service. But let's start with, chronologically, let's start in the beginning. You want to prove that something happened in service. So if you went to sick bay regularly, if you saw a doc, and it's in your record that you had this condition, that's going to be great. A lot of times we know our veterans get seen by doc downrange, or they just treat over the counter, or they manage the pain on their own because op tempo, the culture of their unit. There's just a lot of reasons why people aren't able to or decide not to go see medical care while they're in service. So it's not fatal to your case. You can still win your case, but you have to develop that evidence. If it's not in your service treatment records, your STRs, you're going to be responsible for helping VA prove that something happened in service. So what kind of evidence does VA consider that something happened in service? Your own lay statements. Believe it or not, you are credible to typically you as the veteran are credible to explain what happened in service. So that may not be enough on its own, but that is one piece of evidence, unless it doesn't comply at all with your rate or your MOS. VA will take your statements about what you witnessed, what you experienced, as one piece of evidence that they'll consider. Then we've got lay statements or buddy letters. So those are often from people who you served with in service, people who ran alongside you and know that you were going ouch, ouch, ouch with every step because your feet were flat and the boots were uncomfortable. Or they witnessed that rollover that your unit decided not to report for whatever reason. And they know that you've had back pain ever since that incident. Or they know when you were downrange that you twisted your ankle trying to run for a QRF. So buddy letters are people who saw what happened or who witnessed you shortly after what happened, and they can write statements about what they observed. Now, they don't have to be medical experts, but keep in mind that they are competent to explain to VA what they witnessed. So they can't say, yes, I know that the degenerative disc disease was clearly caused when my buddy fell on the O course. That's something that a doctor or a medical professional is going to need to say. But they can say, I remember when we were doing that O course and my buddy fell and had a hard landing on his tailbone. And ever since then, he was icing it and complaining of pain and had difficulty doing some of the ruck marches, but we all just muscled together and pushed through because that was the command culture. So those kind of statements are really helpful. The more detailed, the better. I mean, you don't want every statement to look the same. You don't want to look like you got it off the internet. So explaining details about what that person remembers from the incident, that's going to be really helpful to proving that something happened in service. And again, this is really the most important when whatever happened is not in your service treatment records. For military sexual trauma, and we'll do a whole series of episodes on military sexual trauma, we know a lot of times people don't report those incidents for a variety of reasons. So VA will look at what other what they call markers. What other markers, what other things happened in service, or changes in your duty? Did you get out early? Were you on track to be Sailor of the Year, and then suddenly we're getting disciplined and losing a rate or getting non-judicial prosecution? Those kind of things are factors that VA will look at to say, yes, when you gave us a statement that something happened, it aligns with these other markers and can kind of prove or at least develop enough evidence. Remember, the standard is at least as likely as not, approximate balance, that the thing that you're saying happened actually happened in service. So those are the types of things. Of course, if you got seen by private doctors at the time, that's great. Usually, if you're active duty, you're going to be seen by base doctor. So, it's unlikely that you're going to have private medical records unless you're in the reserves or there's some other reason why you're getting seen off base for something. But you can try to get those records. Remember that most state laws require medical facilities to keep records for about 7 to 10 years. And so if you're trying to gather records from more than 10 years ago, in some cases even more than 7 years ago, you're going to have a hard time finding those records. So that's the type of evidence that we like to develop to prove that something happened in service, or at least to make VA trigger its duty to assist by showing evidence that something may have happened during service. The next piece is, do you have a current condition? And I have had people come up to me and say, I was exposed to burn pits. I might develop cancer in the future. I'm worried that these exposures that I had could cause neurological conditions in the future. That is not a current condition. VA will not pay service-connected disability benefits for something that you don't have now. Similarly, if you had something in the past and it's resolved, even if it was super painful in the past, if it's resolved, you're not going to get VA disability compensation because it's for a current disability. So getting medical records that show that you have something is really helpful. Now, sometimes you may not have the diagnosis at the time that you file the claim, and that's okay. So if you have the symptoms and you believe that you might have a condition, sleep apnea is one of the common ones that we see because to get scheduled with a sleep specialist and go in for a sleep study can take some time to get on their calendar. But if you know that you're waking up in the middle of the night, your loved one is telling you you're snoring, you're waking up and you're not refreshed, you have all these symptoms of sleep apnea, and you just haven't gone through the sleep study yet, you can file a claim and say, I believe I have sleep apnea, and here's why. And VA may schedule you for a sleep study. You're going to want to try to get records on your own to prove that you have a current diagnosis, but you don't have to wait until that diagnosis to file your claim if you really believe that you have that condition. Similarly, you might have a back condition. You don't know what it is. You just know that your back is killing you all the time. Go ahead and file that claim. It might be degenerative disc disease. It might be degenerative joint disease. It might be intervertebral disc syndrome. It might be lumbosacral strain. It could be a number of things. Just because you don't have a diagnosis, if you're having pain in a joint, I would go ahead and file that claim. Again, work with your doctors to get a diagnosis because you want to have that current diagnosis. And VA may develop that, but it's better if you're able to show that you have a current diagnosis. And then the last piece is the connection, the nexus or connection between what happened in service and your current disability. So we've talked in the past about different ways that you can connect that. It can be presumptive. There's a list of conditions. If you were exposed to Agent Orange, for example, and you develop Parkinson's disease or diabetes or hypertension, those are presumptively linked to Agent Orange. You don't need to get a doctor to explain that your hypertension is related to your Agent Orange. If you can show that you were exposed to Agent Orange and you have a diagnosis of hypertension, VA will automatically grant that, or they should. If they don't, then that's an error that needs to be appealed. So there's presumption, there's direct service connection, and that is showing that you get a medical opinion. Now, VA is going to develop for a medical opinion. They're going to send you for a CMP exam or send your files off to a CMP examiner to give an opinion on whether your current condition is related to service. Sometimes those are great and they result in a grant. But you have no control over what that examiner says. They may be very favorable to veterans. They may be kind of grumpy and think of all veterans as just trying to scam the system. You just don't know who you're going to get. They also may not understand the nuance. So I think sometimes with the more complicated conditions, or if there's a more complicated chain of connection, it can sometimes be hard for those examiners to get it right. The way that VA asks the questions is very black and white sometimes, and it may not capture the nuance of your condition. So, especially if it's a secondary condition. So, secondary would be something like you have a right knee condition, and because of that right knee condition, you walk with a limp. That limp causes your hip to go out of socket, and you get low back pain. So now you've got a knee condition from that injury in service, and you have a hip condition and back condition that are secondary to the knee. I've seen a lot of times where the VA examiners just say knees are not anatomically connected to the back, and so therefore there is no connection. And they're not really looking at the full picture about how it caused you to walk funny, and walking with a limp or walking with an altered gait caused those additional orthopedic injuries. So in cases like that, it can be really helpful to get a private medical opinion. It could be from one of your treating doctors. There's some good companies out there that can look at your medical records, and they'll look at medical literature and explain how X is related to Y. There's also continuity of symptoms. So if you injure yourself in service and you've had symptoms continuously since service, that's considered a chronic condition. And VA will look at that, and theoretically, they'll be able to connect. If you've consistently had symptoms, something started in service and you've been experiencing the same symptoms for the past 20 years and you're still experiencing them, that's going to be a connection based on continuity of symptoms. So evidence for that would be, you still might want to get a nexus letter, private medical opinion, but you're going to try to develop the evidence to show that continuity of symptoms. So it could be statements from friends or family that witnessed you. Maybe it's a migraine condition, and they can explain how many family events you've missed over the years because of your migraines. They can explain when they first started, the progression, how they've become more severe over time, why you didn't go get treatment at the time. If you have medical records, those are great. It's also helpful to try to start keeping records. If it's something that keeps coming back, like migraines or sleep apnea, you may want to keep a journal about your symptoms while you're waiting to get a diagnosis. Or if it's something that you don't get treatment for every time you have a flare up, then keeping a migraine log can be really helpful. So those are the kinds of evidence that are really critical to winning a case. Again, VA will kind of help you develop some of that. And so I don't want people to think they have to have this perfect package put together before they ever even file a claim. Because I think sometimes people will sit on their claims for way too long and they're missing out on back pay because they don't even know where to begin to get started. So get started by filing your claim. If you have a copy of your DD 214, you can submit that, but VA should be able to pull your DD 214 if you give them your social security number, your branch of service, your dates of service, that kind of stuff. So I don't want people spending too much time gathering evidence and wasting time getting their claims started because you could be missing out on back pay. So those are really the key types of evidence that are the most helpful for claims. The last type of evidence is evidence of how severe something is. So VA uses the VA Schedule of Rated Disabilities. We call it VASRD. That's their code or their rule book for what disability level to assign to each disability. So it's really helpful to understand how VA is rating it. And so you can explain the symptoms that you're having, help your doctor document the symptoms you're having in a way that's that aligns with how VA rates the conditions. So, for example, painful motion of the joints is typically rated with a minimum 10% rating. VA doesn't give an increased rating because the pain is significant or the pain is excruciating. To get more than a 10%, VA is looking at limited range of motion typically, or instability, or other factors in the joint. Ankylosis, meaning that you can't move the joint at all. So you want to look at how VA is rating it, because if you were 10% and you're saying, well, now my pain is a 8 out of 10 and it used to only be a 4 out of 10, VA is still going to give you that 10% rating. So it's important to know what symptoms you need to document to get the higher rating. And then the evidence that you can use to get that higher rating can be medical records. Those are great if your doctor is really doing a good job documenting your symptoms. I know a lot of doctors' offices, including VA, you can use My Health eVet to message your doctor, so you don't have to rely on your doctor to write down everything you're telling him or her. You can send a message and say, hey, my IBS is really kicking up. I'm having these symptoms. I want to talk to you about this at my next visit, but I just want to get this in the record so that we can make sure that we're talking about it and coming up with a treatment plan for it. So realize your doctors are there to treat you, but you can help them document your symptoms by sending them messages and talking to them about your symptoms. You can also write personal statements or lay statements about your symptoms, and you can have family and friends write those statements about things that they've observed. So things where a family member has witnessed you uh, have to sit down at family gatherings and not be able to stand for a long period of time because of pain that you're complaining of, that would be really good evidence to show functional limitations and the type of pain that you're having. If they say, we had a veteran who traveled to Europe and there were all those cobblestone streets, and the family wrote a letter saying it was really hard when they were trying to explore these European towns because his knees and his backs and his hip disabilities made it hard for him to walk, and he would trip on the cobblestone streets. So very detailed, specific things that kind of bring to light, add some color to the symptoms that VA can say, okay, yeah, I see that this person is really struggling with these disabilities. Now they're still going to send it to a CMP examiner who's going to complete a disability benefit questionnaire, a DBQ. But those lay statements are things that the examiner has to consider, and they're supposed to factor in when they're writing up their report on how disabled the veteran is or how disabling this specific condition is for the veteran. So level of severity of the condition is another area that's really important for you to understand and help document. So service connection and then how severe it is. Those are really the key critical pieces of evidence that you need when you're filing a claim or if you're appealing a claim by adding additional evidence in. If you can kind of focus on those types of evidence, you're going to be off to a really good start. Thanks so much for joining us here. If you've found this information helpful, please like and subscribe, add comments if you've got questions or if you have suggestions for future topics. We'd love to hear from you. So thanks. We'll talk soon.